Welcome to the Cheating Wife Stories channel. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who'd end up in a situation like this. But there I was, sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone in my hand, trying to process what I had just seen. It started with a message. No warning, no build-up, just a single text that flipped my world upside down. You should know what your wife is up to when you're not around. Attached to it was a photo. My wife, smiling, laughing, leaning in way too close to a man I recognize. Not just any man, my so-called friend Daniel. The image showed them at a restaurant, sitting in a booth, her hand resting on his thigh. My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was innocent. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, but something about the way she looked at him in that picture, comfortable, intimate, added me. I didn't respond to the text right away. Instead, I sat there, scrolling through my phone, digging for clues I didn't even know I was looking for. Suddenly, it all started to make sense. The late nights, the sudden interest in girls' nights out, and the way she had been distant, both physically and emotionally. Every excuse, every unexplained outing, began replaying in my head like puzzle pieces clicking into place. I tried to stay calm, but my hands were shaking. I felt stupid, completely blindsided. I needed answers, and I needed them now, so I waited for her to get home. When she walked through the door later that night, smiling and acting like nothing was wrong, I felt like I was going to explode. I didn't beat around the bush. I held up my phone, showed her the message in the picture, and asked her to explain. For a moment she just stared at it, then at me. Her face shifted from shock to anger almost instantly. "Are you seriously going to believe this garbage?" she snapped. "You're paranoid." Paranoid, I wanted to scream. Instead, I pressed her for the truth. I told her how the pieces didn't add up, how I had been feeling like something was off for weeks, but she didn't budge. She doubled down, calling me insecure and controlling. She made it seem like I was the problem, like I was imagining things. And maybe for a second I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was letting my emotions get the best of me. But then I remembered the look in her eyes in that photo, the look she hadn't given me in months. I demanded to see her phone. That's when her whole demeanor changed. She snatched it away, holding it like her life depended on it. "You don't trust me," she shouted. "This is exactly why our marriage is falling apart." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was turning it around on me, acting like I was the one destroying our relationship. That's when it hit me. She wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. She was just deflecting, trying to make me the bad guy to cover up what she'd done. I wanted to keep pushing. I wanted to make her admit it, but something in me snapped. I couldn't stand to look at her. I grabbed my keys and walked out, leaving her yelling after me as I slammed the door. I needed air. I needed space to think, but most of all I needed to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. As deep down, I already knew this wasn't over. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing, replaying every conversation, every moment that suddenly felt like a lie. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag, and never looking back. But something inside me wouldn't let go. Not yet. I needed closure. Answers. Something more than her gaslighting and empty excuses. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. She came into the kitchen, made coffee, and even tried to talk to me about weekend plans as if the night before had been a bad dream. I didn't play along. I barely said a word, and she could feel it. The tension was thick, but she still tried to push past it, pretending we were fine. Then she brought up the party. Apparently one of our mutual friends, Lisa, was hosting a small get-together that Saturday. My wife casually mentioned it, acting like it was just another social event we were expected to attend. But I saw it differently. I saw it as an opportunity. "Daniel's going to be there," she said, almost too quickly, watching my reaction. I felt my jaw tighten, but I didn't let her see how much it hit me. Instead, I just nodded and agreed to go. If she thought I was going to sit back and let her parade her affair in front of me. She was dead wrong. When Saturday came, I felt like I was walking into enemy territory. I could already feel eyes on me the moment we stepped through the door. The room buzzed with conversations and laughter, but it all felt fake, like everyone there knew something I didn't. And maybe they did. My wife wasted no time making her rounds, smiling and chatting like the perfect hostess. But then I saw him. Daniel, standing by the bar, drink in hand, looking just as smug as I imagined he would. He saw me too, and instead of looking away or pretending not to notice, he smirked, like he'd already won. I wanted to hit him right then and there, but I knew that wasn't the time. So I waited. I watched, and I started noticing the way people looked at me, sympathetically, awkwardly, as if they knew what had happened, but didn't want to get involved. It got worse when my wife finally made her way over to him. She laughed at his jokes, leaned in way too close, and even touched his arm right in front of me. It was deliberate. She wanted me to see it. She wanted me to react, to make a scene so she could play the victim again. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Not yet. Instead, I started talking to people, pretending I wasn't affected. I poured myself a drink and played along with the shallow conversations. But inside, I was boiling. The final straw came when I overheard one of the guests whispering to another. "Did you hear what happened between them? Poor guy doesn't even realize how bad it is." That was it. My patience snapped. I didn't know how the night was going to end, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug any longer. My humiliation had reached its limit, and I was ready to face it head on. I set my drink down and took a deep breath. My hands were clenched so tightly my knuckles had gone white. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to stand there and let her humiliate me any longer. Not in front of these people. Not in front of him. I pushed through the crowd. My eyes locked on her as she threw her head back and laughed at something Daniel had said. She didn't even notice me coming. When I finally reached them, the air around us seemed to shift. Conversation softened. People turned to watch, sensing the tension. I didn't bother easing into it. I went straight for the truth. "What the hell is this?" I said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. My voice came out sharper than I expected, but I didn't care. "You're really doing this here?" In front of everyone. Her smile vanished and her eyes darted toward the growing audience. "What are you talking about?" she said, trying to keep her tone calm, but I could see the panic behind it. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." I gestured toward Daniel. "You've been sneaking around with him, lying to my face, and now you're parading it in front of all these people like I don't exist." Gasp rippled through the room, but my wife's face hardened. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Don't do this here," she hissed. "Why not?" I shot back. "You weren't worried about doing it here when you draped yourself all over him, like I wasn't standing right there." Daniel shifted, his smugness fading into something more defensive, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there, letting her handle it. Coward. Then it happened. She raised her hand, and before I could react, her palm cracked across my face. Hard, the sound echoed in the room, and the sting burned through my cheek. The entire party went dead silent. My ears were ringing, and for a split second I couldn't even process what had just happened. I touched my cheek, half expecting blood, but it was just heat radiating off my skin. "You're pathetic," she spat, her voice trembling. "You can't stand that someone actually wants me, someone who treats me better than you ever did." Her words hit harder than the slap. People in the crowd exchanged glances, whispering, and I could feel their pity like needles in my skin. Daniel finally stepped in then, placing a hand on her shoulder as if to calm her down. "Maybe you should leave," he said, looking at me like I was some kind of stray dog that had wandered in uninvited. That's when something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to walk away. I wasn't going to let them humiliate me and then toss me out like garbage. My fist clenched and I took a step closer. "You think I'm leaving?" I growled. "Not a chance." Daniel tried to act tough, straightening his shoulders, but I could see it. the flicker of fear in his eyes. He wasn't ready for what was coming next. There was she, and in that moment I didn't care. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I wasn't thinking about the people watching. All I knew was that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I didn't hesitate. My blood was boiling, and all the humiliation, the lies, and the slap that was still burning on my cheek fueled me like gasoline poured on fire. Daniel took a half step back as I moved closer, but I wasn't about to give him any room to breathe. "You think you can stand there and talk to me like that?" I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. After sneaking around with my wife, after making me look like a fool, he tried to keep his cool, but I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. "Look, man, I get you're upset, but this isn't the place for this." I almost laughed. "Isn't the place? You had no problem making it the place when you decided to parade around with her right in front of me." I jabbed a finger toward my wife, who stood frozen, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, but I didn't let my eyes linger on her. My focus was locked on him. "Back off," Daniel said, his voice finally firming up. He squared his shoulders like he thought that would intimidate me, but it had the opposite effect. "Or what?" I stepped closer. The crowd shifted, some of them backing away while others leaned in, eager to see how far this would go. That's when he shoved me. It wasn't much, just enough to push me back a step, but it was all the excuse I needed. My fist connected with his jaw before he even had time to blink. The crack of the impact echoed through the room, and he stumbled back, nearly knocking over the table behind him. Shouts erupted, but I couldn't make out what anyone was saying. Everything blurred like the whole world had gone silent except for the pounding in my chest. Daniel straightened up, wiping blood from his lip, and then lunged at me. We crashed into the couch, knocking over glasses and bottles as we hit the floor. He threw a wild punch that barely grazed my shoulder, but I grabbed him by the collar and drove my fist into his ribs. Once, twice, 3 times, until he was gasping for air. "Get off him," I heard my wife scream, but I didn't stop. Not until he shoved me hard enough to scramble back to his feet. His face was red, his nose bleeding, and his eyes wide with panic. He swung again, but this time I caught his arm and twisted it behind his back before driving him face first into the coffee table. The glass shattered, and he let out a howl of pain as he crumpled to the ground, clutching his face. Blood smeared across his mouth and chin, and I saw one of his teeth lying among the broken glass. I stood over him, breathing hard, my knuckles throbbing. The room was dead silent again except for Daniel's groans. My wife rushed to him, crouching down and crying as she touched his bloody face. "You're insane," she screamed at me. But I didn't even look at her. My eyes were still on him. "You want to humiliate me. You want to treat me like I'm nothing," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "This is what you get." He didn't respond. He couldn't, and for the first time that night, I felt like I had control again. But it wasn't over yet, not even close. The silence that followed felt heavier than the fight itself. Daniel lay sprawled out on the floor. Blood smeared across his mouth and chin, moaning in pain while my wife knelt beside him, frantically trying to stop the bleeding. Her hands were trembling as she pulled a napkin off the table, pressing it to his face. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, fists clenched, staring down at the man who had destroyed my marriage and the woman who had let it happen. The crowd around us was frozen. No one dared to step in. No one tried to stop what had already unfolded. They just stood there like statues, wide-eyed, and waiting to see what would happen next. I could feel their judgment. I could feel their whispers crawling over my skin. But I didn't care. Not anymore. I took a step forward, and my wife snapped her head up, eyes blazing. "Haven't you done enough?" She spat, her voice shaking. "Look at him. Look at what you've done." I didn't even blink. "What I've done? Are you kidding me right now?" My voice echoed through the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You humiliated me. You slapped me in front of everyone, in front of him. You betrayed me, and now you want to act like I'm the monster here. We opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. No, you don't get to talk your way out of this. Not this time. I pointed down at Daniel, who was still groaning on the floor. This is on you. You brought this into our lives. You lied. You cheated. And now you're crying over him. Over this piece of trash. Daniel tried to sit up, wincing in pain. You're insane, man, he muttered. His words slurred through swollen lips. I lunged toward him, and he flinched, throwing his hands up defensively. But I stopped just short, towering over him. You think you're the victim here, I growled. You think you can sneak around with another man's wife and just walk away like nothing happened. How does it feel now, huh? How does it feel to be exposed? I could see it in his eyes. Fear. The same smug look he'd worn earlier was gone, replaced by pure panic. I turned back to my wife, who was still kneeling beside him, tears streaking her face. And you, I said, my voice low but firm. I hoped this was worth it. I hoped throwing away our marriage, our life, everything we built was worth this. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. She just looked up at me, wide-eyed and broken, like she hadn't expected things to fall apart so quickly. I stepped back, scanning the crowd. And the rest of you, I said, raising my voice. I know you've all been whispering about this for weeks, probably longer, watching me walk around like an idiot while you all laughed behind my back. My eyes landed on a few familiar faces, friends I trusted, friends who had clearly known the truth but said nothing. You're just as bad as they are. A few people looked away, embarrassed, but no one spoke up. I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest. But before I could take another step, my wife finally found her voice. Wait, she cried, scrambling to her feet. Don't do this. Don't just walk away. I stopped but didn't turn around. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. I made a mistake, okay. I messed up, but we can fix this. We can talk about this. I spun around so fast she flinched. Fix this. Talk about this. After everything you've done, after everything I've just seen, you think there's anything left to fix. She took a step back, her eyes darting to Daniel, who was still groaning on the floor, and then back to me. I never wanted it to go this far, she whispered. Too late, I said coldly. I turned and walked toward the door, pushing past the stunned faces in the crowd. I didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't hesitate. I was done. Done with her. Done with the lies and done being the fool everyone thought I was. But as I stepped outside and felt the cool night air hit my face, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. I walked out of that house, but the anger didn't leave me. It clung to my skin, burning hotter with every step I took down the driveway. The sound of muffled voices and hurried footsteps trailed behind me. But I didn't stop. Not until I reached my car. Not until I slammed the door shut and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved, and my heart pounded in my ears, but it wasn't over. Not yet. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was still red, my cheeks stung from her slap, and my hands were covered in blood. His blood. In the worst part, I didn't regret it. Not for a second, but as I sat there, the reality of what had just happened started to sink in. My marriage was over. Everything I thought I had. Everything I thought we were building. It was gone. Destroyed. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen. Her name lit up the display. Amanda. I let it ring. A minute later it buzzed again. Another call. Then a text. Then another. Please, talk to me. We need to fix this. Throw everything away like this. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, making the horn blare for a split second. Fix it. Throw it away. She had already thrown it away the second she let him into our lives. The second she decided I wasn't enough. I sat there staring at the phone until the screen went dark. Then I made my decision. I turned the key in the ignition and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first, just away. Away from the house, away from her, away from the mess she had made of our lives. But as the adrenaline started to fade, something else crept in. Clarity. For the first time since I'd seen that picture, I wasn't clouded by anger or humiliation. I was thinking straight, and I knew exactly what needed to happen next. I wasn't going to let her twist this around and make herself the victim. I wasn't going to let her come crawling back, begging for forgiveness, only to turn around and do it again the second she got bored. No, she'd made her choice, and now it was my turn. The next morning I hired a lawyer. I didn't give her time to spin her story. I didn't let her manipulate me into second-guessing myself. I filed for divorce that same day, and I made sure she knew it. When she came home later that night, I was already packing my things. She stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face, begging me to stop. But I didn't even look at her. "You don't get to cry now," I said, shoving another shirt into my suitcase. "You don't get to play the victim." "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "I messed up, but we can fix this." I finally turned to face her. "No, we can't." And with that, I walked out. The weeks that followed weren't easy. There were more texts, more calls, more attempts to make me feel guilty or reconsider. But I stayed firm. I focused on myself, on rebuilding the pieces of my life she had shattered. And every time doubt started creeping in, I thought about that slap, about the way she had looked at him right in front of me, and it reminded me why I was doing this. Daniel, he didn't come around again. After what I did to him, I doubt he even had the nerve to look me in the eye if we ever crossed paths. From what I heard, he stopped seeing her shortly after. I guess the excitement of sneaking around wasn't so thrilling once it came with consequences. And as for me, I moved on. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. It did, but it also reminded me of something important. Respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you demand. And if someone refuses to give it to you, you walk away. Because no matter how much it hurts, walking away is still better than letting someone tear you down and call it love.